Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it for Paper 1, OCR, GCSE, PE. We've been doing this for a couple of days already. On Tuesday, what did we do, Marta? We did IGCSE. Yep. Yesterday, we did AQA and Edexcel Paper 1. And today, we're on OCR, GCSE with you guys. And then later on this afternoon, we're doing WJEC, GCSE as well. It's good fun. Couple of things. My name's James. I have my colleague Marta here with me. Marta, would you like to say hello?
Hello.
So Marta's here. She's all about the chat. She's all about the interaction. Folks, we love a bit of interaction. I know it's not the coolest thing to get me to say your school name or whatever, but if you want us to do that, let us know. You can chat to us live on the Hub page. There's a live chat down there. We keep it private in the sense that we tried YouTube live chat for a little while and maybe not. So you can chat with us that way or get in touch with us on the social media. Twitter's a really common one that people use. And we will sort of answer your questions live and we'll do that for you. So do please, it reassures us. So do please do that. A couple of other things, favour for me first of all, before we get straight into this. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel or hit a bit of a like. I know it's sort of like, but it actually is really valuable to us in the sense that it really gets sort of exposure and it sort of builds like a bit of momentum around what we're doing and stuff like that. So it's a small thing, but it does actually help. So I would genuinely appreciate it. Furthermore, do share a bit of information about what you're doing. If you're in a classroom with a bit of pizza, get it onto social media. Obviously, be careful with what your photo and stuff like that, but do that. And finally, with resources, can I stress to you that all of the resources that accompany the session are available with the video. So if you're on the Hub page, just below the Hub page, just there's notes pages. They're essential. There's also the National Mock Exam, which you don't necessarily need to have answered, but you should be looking at it for reference because it sort of interacts with this session. You can also be looking in there for the mark schemes for the National Mock Exam and also the model answers we've written. That all kind of interacts to become the package of resources we want you guys to use here. Now, in terms of timing for the session, both of our sessions yesterday took about 1 hour 10, wasn't it, in total? That's what we're anticipating. Somewhere between an hour and 15 we think is pretty predictable, okay? And then what we'll do is at the end, we'll just do a bit of a sort of a debrief, answer any questions, those sort of things, and go from there. Marta, have I missed anything before we give this a go?
I don't think you have. I think we can crack on.
I'm going to start adjusting my headphones, which I need for this next bit, and we're going to get hold of me digital pen and we're going to get cracking, folks. This is a bit of a nerve-wrack for me as I switch feeds, but let's go for it. Pens at the ready. It's going to be busy. I make no apologies, guys. It's a fast session. You may need to come back and cover bits of the session, that sort of thing. I think we're aiming for something like 14 topics or 12 topics in an hour. So it's a proper whiz, okay? So be prepared, stick with it, and you can always catch up with any bits that we sort of go quickly through, okay? Let's do this. Welcome to 2023 revision for OCR GCSE PE. Today we're doing paper one. Good stuff. A couple of things I'd like you to be considering. First of all, you're taking this session, you could just use the, like the video, I suppose, like live or on demand. Just take the video and watch it. I suppose you could do that. But it's much better if you have the notes page in front of you. That's going to be crystal clear as I go through this. Ideally, you'll have the exam infographic to hand. All this is available in the description or in just below the hub page, by the way, or just above the video on the hub page is the infographic. Ideally, you'll have the national mock exam somewhere, because that exam details lots and lots of the skills and the content we're going to talk about, the mark scheme that goes with that, and the model answers. Now, can I stress with this, I'm not necessarily saying you should have done this national mock exam. You might want to do it in your preparations before paper one, perhaps. But you could certainly have a look at it. And because you've got the mark scheme and the model answers available to you, it gives you a great foundation to understand how questions might be asked, how they might be answered, and what your examiner might be looking for. So all that is assumed. Now, you'll notice at the start of your sort of notes pack that we've got these profiles. We've got Josh, we've got Tom, Laura, Kate, Julie, Carlos. The idea of these is that whatever theories we look at here, you can use those for application. Okay, so, in a minute we're going to talk about functions of skeleton. I'm going to talk about rugby, but why not talk about wheelchair basketball? Why not talk about netball? Why not talk about triathlon? You've got these possibilities so that you, in your preparation, can say, right, okay, I've looked at that in one way. How does it look with this other performer? How does it look with this other performer? So these are almost like the nutrition of your application. Okay, we want you to go and use these and digest the content we're going to go through today further and further with these multiple applications in different directions. Now, I will mention all of these performers today, and we'll use them as well in this session, but you can use them beyond that. Now then, folks, critical point. This material here was all covered in the national mock exam. So the national mock exam written by myself, that national mock exam covers all of that. The bits that are highlighted, we are selecting out and bringing into this session today. Okay, so the bits highlighted, they are in today's session. Now, I just also want to make reference to what these numbers mean. Maybe let me choose an obvious two. These numbers here, okay, 24 and 27. That means that since 2018 to 2022, short-term effects of exercise have contributed 24 raw marks on these papers and 27 for long-term. These are totals, by the way, they're totals. But it lets us know sort of how commonly these things are assessed. So we know that the effects of exercise are really assessed commonly, right? Therefore, we're including it. Levers, another great example. You'll see themes of this. Planes and axes. You'll see themes of this on your infographic, of course. But we just there's no particular reason why I'm not doing types of synovial joint today. It's more that we've got sort of an hour and I've got to select some material, not others. Now, let's get into this. We're going to fly straight into the functions of the skeleton. Nice and simple. We have got 6 of them. You can number them if you really want to, but we're going to go through them and give a couple of details. Okay, support, first of all. Remember what function means. It means, what does the skeleton actually do? What's it for? So let's actually go through this a little bit. With support, we are talking about often the body being upright. The skeleton supports this kind of upright, we'll come to the word in a moment, posture. Okay, it provides a framework. So all these muscles that we've studied and what have you, they've got to pull against something. That's the framework of the skeleton. That's what it does. And that's my other point. That support is the support of muscles. Okay, muscles can only do their contractile work and their force production work when they've got something to produce that force against. That is what we mean by support. Now, posture is an application of those principles. So let's have a look at posture here. We're talking about, in sport, the correct shape. We are talking about human shape. So think, I know it sounds like a really sort of base principle, but think, for example, if we are running, sprinting, let's say, sprinting has a certain shape to it, and that shape comes from the skeleton of the body. It's kind of upright, as we mentioned before. It's got knees bending and hips flexing and extended, because that's the skeletal shape which we have. Now let's get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty here. We can get into protection a little bit. I'm not totally sure what that means. We're going to get into protection. Protection, of course, is quite an obvious one, but the key thing we want to be referring to is we are protecting internal organs, soft tissues, and that's what that skeleton is doing. And beyond that, we want to be really looking at the idea of reducing that risk of injury, protecting vital organs, but which bones? Now, we tend to find these sort of flatter bones do this job, and a brilliant example is the cranium protecting the brain, and we'll look in a moment examples when this might be relevant. We're talking about the ribs, and they are protecting the lungs. We are talking about the sternum and this protecting the heart. We are talking about, let's say, the vertebrae, effectively the backbones, and that protecting the spinal cord. Okay, we are talking about the pelvis, and the pelvis protecting the reproductive organs. Okay, so all of those are protective examples, and we'll look in a second at specific cases where that becomes relevant. Movement's an interesting one. Again, we've got loads and loads of information we could cover on movement, but some key things. The skeleton provides a surface for muscles. Okay, surface for muscles. Muscles are basically, in terms of skeletal muscles attached to the skeleton. So there's got to be a surface. And those muscles, they attach to the skeleton via tendons. And tendons are your force transmission. Okay, so if a muscle pulls, it applies force through the tendon, and that tendon applies it onto the bone, which then moves. And what this creates, folks, is a system of levers. And we're going to come back to that key point in a few moments' time. Okay, so muscles pull bones. Oh, and I should say as well that movement, of course, occurs at joints. Our joints are effectively our fulcrums. We've got loads of examples: flexion at the elbow, abduction at the shoulder. That movement occurs at joints. Blood cell production. A couple of points on this that I really want you to get sort of nailed down. First of all, we are talking about the production of RBCs, red blood cells, but we are talking about as well the production of white blood cells. Remind yourself of what each one does. A red blood cell is effectively an oxygen, it's a gas carrying vessel. Typically it's carrying oxygen, but of course it can also carry other gases, carbon dioxide, for example, on the way back to the lung. So red blood cells are produced by the skeleton in the bone marrow. White blood cells, which are there, obviously part of your immune system. You guys are studying this in biology, your specific immune system. Those white blood cells are also produced there. But we also produce in our bone marrow platelets. And platelets, which are actually cell fragments, they are there, of course, to clot the blood. So if we are doing an 800 meter, or let's say Kate, our triathlete, falls from her bike and busts her knee up, platelets will help to clot the blood which is exiting from whatever wound she's got on her knee. And then finally, folks, let's finish off with minerals up here. And what we're talking about with minerals are that bones release minerals. So bones are released. Bones release minerals. Minerals are released by the bones. And a couple of examples, we want to give calcium, which is super important for bone health itself, also involved in muscular contraction, and phosphorus, which is involved in muscular contraction. So these are examples of the storage of minerals. Now, that's all fine. Let's look at how we might word some of those things. I've taken specifically a rugby example. Let me choose a different colour. I've taken a rugby example, so we could be referring to this as Carlos, although I think this is considered to be rugby rather than wheelchair rugby, but nevertheless. How would we write these out as applications? Supporting the lower body when a forward lands on their feet after a line out. So this is definitely not wheelchair rugby, this is rugby. Supporting this. So we've got this support happening when the forward lands on their feet after a line. So, and we should be able to say so, and that we can then say they can attack, okay? So we've got to say what the impact of that is. Let's go for posture. Allows the tackler to create the correct shape and wrap their arms with the correct technique so they force their opponent back. Protection. The sternum protects the heart when two players collide during a tackle to prevent an injury. Movement. Leverage at the elbow. So we've got our key term there. Leverage at the elbow joint when the centre passes a ball to a teammate. Okay, so we've got our example. Blood cell productions. Red blood cells carry oxygen and carbon dioxide to and from the muscles of the legs when running. Okay, and that allows our performer to work at higher intensities aerobically, because we've got that oxygen present for our aerobic respiration. And we've also got mineral storage. Calcium causes leg bones to be dense and strong to cope with the weight-bearing running of rugby. Okay, so we've got some lovely, nice examples there of where we would take this. So let's move our way down. We've also got the roles of muscles, which of course applies to this. We've effectively the muscles we're talking about here are applying their force via tendons onto the skeleton for the movement we made before. We have got three types of muscles that we are going to address. 1, 2, 3. So first of all, agonist. Sometimes you might come across the term prime mover. We're going to use the term agonist here. An agonist is a muscle that produces the movement, okay? So the agonist is always, there's our prime mover, is always a contracting muscle. Okay, so a muscle that is contracting is the agonist, okay, by definition. Our antagonist muscle, it works to counter the movement, and this is our key word. It relaxes whilst agonist contracts, and this is the key principle. Muscles work in pairs, more of which in a second. Muscles work in pairs. One muscle can only pull. Okay, so let's take your bicep in your upper arm, for example. All it can do is pull. It can't push, it can't turn, it can't twist. It can pull. So what does it need? It can't push the elbow back into an extended position. No, it needs another muscle, the tricep at the back of the arm, to go about doing that for us. Okay, so they have to work in pairs. Otherwise, the joint can only move in one direction, then it's stuck. Now, we've also got fixator muscles. Fixator muscles are stabilizer muscles. And a little tip here, they tend to be above the joint that is moving. So, for example, if we're talking about the elbow joint and we're talking about the bicep and the tricep, the fixator, or the stabilizer, I suppose you could say, will be the deltoid, because it's above, holding that joint in position. It prevents any unnecessary movement. It makes us, in essence, folks, more efficient in our movement. And there's the example, the deltoid at the shoulder joint during a bicep curl. The deltoid sort of fixes and holds things in place so that the movement can be efficient. Let's just have a little example of that. Look here, we've effectively got a bicep curl. We have got this direction and then obviously lowering to this direction. And we know that the bicep is the muscle which is doing that work, right? But we've also got this deltoid muscle here, and to an extent the pectorals over here. And they are holding this sort of posture and stabilizing and fixing that position. Now again, we could look at it here in terms of this press-up position. Let's say that our performer is on the way up here, for argument's sake. What's happening now is that the tricep on the back of her arm is contracting and of course producing straightening of the elbow, extending of the elbow, but that is being fixed again by the deltoid, which is holding the body in position. Okay, so that fixator is important. Can I just stress a couple of things here? Let's go back to our bicep curl. If we look at the upward phase here, of course, the bicep, I sort of drew it in red before, I'll sort of overlay it in blue here. The bicep is our agonist, okay? And to allow that to happen, the tricep, this muscle here, is lengthening and relaxing, and that is our antagonist. And it's really important to make that, to stress that. Those muscles work in unison, they work in combination. They cannot do their work alone. Okay, so one other example, just to remind you of a couple of muscles really. We've got a muscle here, which is the quadricep. If I spelled it right, that would help. Quadricep. There's our quadricep there. We've got muscle B, which is the hamstrings group. Now, you'll notice there's an S on the end of both of those. These are groups of muscles. There's 4 muscles in the quadricep, 3 muscles in the hamstrings. I'm not going to go over them here. But what we do have here is we have a pair. We have effectively an antagonistic pair of muscles. Now, again, let's assume that our fella here is on his way up. He's doing some kind of squat and he's in the upwards motion, okay? What's actually going to be happening here? Well, the knee joint, that's what we're going to look at. The knee joint is going from this current position, which is here flexed, and it's going to go from that position and it's going to straighten, and this person's going to be standing in this position. So they're going to extend, right? So this extension of the knee. Now, the muscle that causes extension of the knee is the quadricep group. The quadricep group pulls in that direction, okay, and it straightens the knee. So we're going to have our agonist being the quadricep, and of course the hamstring group, they're going to relax, and that hamstring group is going to relax, and it is going to be the antagonist to allow the movement to occur. Okay, so I just want to get that principle across to you. Okay, I'm just going to pause there just to sip my tea and just to blow my nose. 1 second. And we're back. Lovely little sip of tea. That I've got to say, I love a cup of tea. So levers, everyone's favourite. I mean, come on. A couple of things I want you to be aware of. A lever needs certain things, and just as sort of like base intuition, a lever needs a rigid bar. We're going to look at that in a second. It needs a rigid bar. Look, we've got that in terms of the black line here. It needs what we call a fulcrum. Okay, that's meant to be a triangle. It needs a fulcrum, okay, which in the human body is a joint. It needs a load or resistance, something to lift, something to move, and of course it needs, in this case, an effort, which in the human body is a muscle contraction. Okay, so those 4 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, are required for us to actually have a lever, and we're going to go through that and sort of basically classify different kinds and how those things can be rearranged. Can I stress to you that this rigid bar should not be neglected? That is a long bone in the body. Let's call it let's say, or typically it's long bone, let's call it a humerus, let's call it a femur, let's call it a radius. That's typically what that bar's going to be. So we talked about the function of the skeleton before. That it provides that framework, right? And of course, as I said before, fulcrums are joints, efforts are the muscle contractions, and loads depends what we're doing, but it's the thing we're carrying or moving. So we've got a system of levers, and what the one we've got on the screen here, this is called a first class lever, and of course we've got an excellent example of it, which is neck extension. Okay, and I'm going to go through this. So why is this a first class lever? It's a first class lever because the F is between. Okay, now it technically, you could argue it's in the middle, but it's not always in the middle of the lever arm. It's not always in the middle of the rigid bar. So the F is between, the fulcrum is between the load and the effort. So can I just stress that? Because the fulcrum is between the other 2 components, this is what makes it a first class lever. Now our neck extension is an excellent example of it. Let's actually go through and say what these things are. The fulcrum is the neck joint. Now if I could spell it, is the neck joint. Now we would typically call this the atlas and axis of the head, okay, but it's actually what that is. The load or the resistance is the actual head, okay, so it's the weight of the head, and the effort is the neck muscles, okay, the neck muscles, and those neck muscles are applying force at the back of the head back here and pulling the head so this volleyball player can look up and sort of spot the ball. Those are our components, and when we get that configuration, we get a first class lever. Let's look at a second class. So here we go. Let's imagine that this foot is sort of like the ankle is pressing upwards, or maybe this is a person taking off at a long jump board or something like that. Maybe this is Julie in our netball example jumping to catch a high pass into the D or something like that, right? So let's have a think about it. It's a second class lever this time. They choose a different color. It's a second class, and it's a second class because the load is between. The load is between the other 2 components. So what do we have here? We have the fulcrum. Okay, so there's our fulcrum there. Here it is. There's our fulcrum. This is the ball of the foot. The ball of the foot. Okay, that's our fulcrum. We have the load here. That's obviously between. The load is the body weight. Now, the human body, its center of mass acts downwards through the tibia, and you can kind of see that coming down. And the effort, this bit here, is actually the gastrocnemius muscle applying its force onto the heel bone. I'm not going to go on to which bone is the heel bone. Well, you know, if you want, it's called the calcaneus. It doesn't matter. But the gastrocnemius force application onto the heel, and that raises the heel up. And that's actually a really useful thing. So those are our components of second class lever. And can I just stress, this is the only real second class lever in the body. That's technically not quite true what I said, but for the purposes of our studies, that will do for now. Okay, and we finally got our third class. So here's our third class. And not surprisingly, our third class tells us that our effort is between the other 2 components. So we're going to use the example of a bicep curl. Now, OCR would like me to tell you that elbow movement is a third class lever. What I am willing to tell you is that elbow flexion is a third class lever, and some forms of elbow extension are a third class lever. I'm not going any further than that because I can't call black white. They're not the same. Anyway, you teachers out there, if you want to chat about it, I've got blogs on it. So here we go. So what do we have? Well, first of all, we have our fulcrum, and our fulcrum, of course, is the effort. So our fulcrum, of course, is our elbow joint. Brilliant. We have our load. Okay, so the load here is, let's call it the dumbbell, or you could also say it's the dumbbell plus the weight of the forearm. But our effort, of course, is the bicep contraction. Okay, and as you see here, this one is between the other two. It's not quite in the middle, but it's between the other two. And that's what defines this as a third class lever. So that's a really useful aspect for us. Now, we're now going to look at one particular principle of levers, and that principle is called mechanical advantage. Okay, so that's where we are going with this. We've got this thing called mechanical advantage, and I'm going to kind of prove it to you. I'll just define it for you first, and then I'll kind of prove it to you. So mechanical advantage is when a lever overcomes a large load. Okay, and what we mean by that is something that's heavy, right? That's all we mean by that. Overcomes a large load with relatively little effort. Okay, so the muscle contraction force doesn't need to be huge, relatively little effort. So despite something being heavy, we don't need a really large muscular contraction force. Now, where do we find this? We find this at the ankle. We find this in second class levers. Okay, we looked at those just up above, didn't we? What am I writing? That's meant to say levers, Gordon Bennett. So how does this work? So the key thing to be aware of here is these distances. So I'm going to do almost like a measurement of this distance to here. That distance there, the horizontal distance between the effort and the fulcrum, this is what we call an effort arm. And you're probably thinking, arm, James, that looks like a foot. Arm is about is a description of the distance between the two. And of course it's called an arm because it's part of a rigid bar, isn't it? We said that before. Whereas this distance here, the distance between the load and the fulcrum, this is what's called the load or the resistance arm. And in essence, folks, if the effort arm is longer and the load arm is shorter, it's that which creates mechanical advantage. And the principle is a very, very useful one here. Okay, that is that if the effort arm is longer and the load arm is shorter, we get mechanical advantage. Now, what you'll notice over here on our bicep curl, look, what we've got all of a sudden is I'll try and do it in the same colours. We've got our effort arm here is really short, and we've got our load arm is really long. So guess what? We do not have mechanical advantage at the elbow. No, we actually technically have something called mechanical disadvantage. We don't really study that. But the point to make here is that this has got lots of strengths, literally. We can do these things. However, the other issue, or the issue with mechanical advantage, is it creates a short range of motion, and it's also quite slow. Okay, so other levers like the elbow, they're kind of faster and more flexible, but they're not as powerful, they're not as forceful. And that's because of the actual configuration of the components of the levers. Now, we're going to leave that there. It's actually a very interesting form of study going further, but we'll leave that there for now. I am just going to pause just for the briefest second once more, guys. So I just need to blow my nose. Thanks for being patient with me. Okay, another one, planes and axes, everyone's favourite. Absolutely. So I'm going to get into the planes first. Can I just stress that movement happens along planes, okay? Along planes. That's how movement happens. And I'll show you that in a second. But let's name them first of all. I've got this plane here. This is a sagittal plane. Oh, seems to have some sort of flashing light on here. I'm not totally sure why. It's a bit weird. This sagittal. What we've got here is our frontal plane. What we've got here is our transverse plane. So what I just want you guys to do is, if, for example, if I was to show you, say, that to move along this frontal plane here, this right shoulder could abduct to here, to here, to here, to here. Can you see that that is movement along that plane? Just as, for example, you know, if this leg at the hip was to go here, I don't think I can get my leg that far to the side, but that is movement along the plane, right? Well, what I'd just like you to quickly do is just to sort of decide in your own mind, which of these three movement examples is movement along each of those three planes? What do you think? Which one's which? And I'll just sort of ramble a second just while you have a bit of a think about that, and I'm going to ramble a bit more. I drink my tea, but I've run out. But we're going to say the following. If we take our rotation here in the circle, and by the way, I'm only talking about the rotational movement of the body here. Of course, what's happening is that is movement along the transverse plane. If we take our somersault here, sort of
on the beam. What movement is that along? Well, that is movement along the sagittal plane. What about our cartwheel? Well, that is effectively a series of abduction and adductions, and that is movement along the frontal plane. So this is a really useful way to think about it. We have got these different kinds of movement along planes. Now, let's be clear, most movements are complex and they involve different. You can literally see that here. We have actually got the arms of our discus thrower. What are they? They've been moved along the frontal plane. I'm specifically talking about the rotation in the transverse plane. So the movements are complex, right? They're often multi-planar, we could say, but what we want to have is this base principle of these movements that go this way. So start to literally list out different movements that go on. Like if we were to talk, for example, at the sagittal plane, we could talk about a bicep curl, we could talk about a tuck jump, we could talk about most throwing actions, we could talk about, for example, a forward roll, a somersault. They're all happening along the sagittal plane, and you can come up with your own examples. Now, where life gets a little bit interesting for us, folks, is that we've also got our axes of rotation. And like I stress to you, movement does not happen along an axis. Movement happens around an axis, either in that direction or in that direction. Now, you might notice those two directions are what we call clockwise and anti-clockwise, because it's rotational. That's all rotational movement is. But I want to make sure that we've got this correct. Now, again, all you teachers out there, I don't know how aware you are of this, but these are called different things with different exam boards. So I am going to go so specific here, because I'm literally teaching the WJC in a few minutes' time, and I did AQA and EdExcel yesterday revision, and covered levers and all of them, levers, covered axes and all of them. It's a bit of a head spin, to be perfectly honest with you. Anyway, what we've got here is our longitudinal axis. It is the axis that goes theoretically through the body from top to bottom. Now imagine if we got this bar and we twisted it, what kind of movements would actually occur here, where we would have things like 360-degree twists. Something, you could link that to all kinds of things. This could be, for example, our netball player, Julie, pivoting. This could be a skier turning a gate. These are all examples of rotation around the longitudinal axis. Now, if we imagine now twisting this kind of foosball bar, what would we get here? Well, first of all, let's name it. This is what we call our transverse axis. Our transverse axis, side to side. So, of course, if we rotate it, we tend to get things like somersaults. I'm not even sure I've spelled that right. We tend to get things like forward roll. Okay, we tend to get things like flexion and extension. We tend to get things like the running action. And one thing to note about this is we actually have a transverse axis at the knee, at the ankle, at the shoulders, okay, not just at the hip. So, of course, if we, for example, flex our knee, extend our knee, that is rotation around that transverse axis of the knee. So just bear that in mind. It's like a running action in this case. Now, finally, we've got our frontal axis. Now, our frontal runs through the body from front to back. And of course, if we were to twist this bar, what would we get? We'd get something like a cartwheel, wouldn't we? We'd get something like a cartwheel, or we'd get a diving save. That's a really nice example. We'd get a diving save from a goalkeeper who's maybe diving to the bottom left corner to save a hockey ball or something like that. Okay, that's rotation around, in this case, the frontal axis. Now, again, same thing. I'll just sort of fill some time. What are each of these rotating around? Give yourself a little sort of a arrow opportunity here and put those things together. And I'll start with the cartwheel. Well, we already know the cartwheel is rotation around the frontal axis. We know already our somersault here is rotation around the transverse axis. And we know already that our rotation around the circle is rotation around the longitudinal axis. You should be prepared to identify other examples of that kind of movement. Okay, let's carry straight on. Pathway of blood. What I'll do here is I'll talk through the process, and I'm going to give you some key language when we change the canvas, okay? So we're going to follow with a pathway, literally here, we're going to follow the pathway of a red blood cell. So first of all, let me find a nice colour for this. I'm going to go, even though it's a red blood cell, well, I'll give it a kind of a reddy tinge. So we've got a red blood cell here. It might not look that red, but it is returning to the heart via the vena cava vein. Okay. Now you just remember there are two versions of this vena cava. There's what we call the superior and the inferior, and they're kind of represented by these two channels. One's from the upper body, one's from the lower body. But basically, our vein is going to come back our blood cells are going to come back into our right atrium. Look right there, right atrium, and it's going to do that via the vena cava. So from the vena cava into the right atrium. it's that right atrium now is going to go through a contraction, and that blood cell is going to be pushed downwards into the right ventricle. So from the right atrium into the right ventricle. And that happens, by the way, folks, via this valve here. And that's our tricuspid valve. So it passes through. Now our ventricle, our right ventricle now is going to contract. So literally going to contract inwards like this and upwards like this. And it's going to force our red blood cell up and out in this direction. Okay, so it's going to go up and out in this direction. Now, first of all, it passes a valve here. Okay, this is called the pulmonary valve, sometimes called a semilunar valve, and that red blood cell is now going to pass up through the pulmonary artery. That's where we are now, through the pulmonary artery, and it's going to go up to the lung. Okay, and at the lung, of course, this is where this red blood cell is likely to be oxygenated. Now, I use the word likely, not accidentally. Okay, it is likely. It may already be oxygenated. I'm not going to get into this and oxygen dissociation, all that kind of stuff. But let's just assume it has no oxygen on it. It's going to go and get oxygenated at the capillary network of the lung. So it passes through the capillary network of the lung. Now, you biologists, which is all of you, by the way, you actually know that my red blood cell is the exact size and diameter of one of those capillaries, don't you? 7 micrometers. Oh, you know, that biology is helpful here. They squeeze literally through those capillary beds. And it now starts returning back to the heart. How? Via the pulmonary vein. So from the lung, via the pulmonary vein, it comes back, and it comes back into our left atrium. There it is, our left atrium. Now, this left atrium is now going to squeeze. It's going to push this blood cell down through this valve. This is called the bicuspid valve. Down through this valve, and it's going to find itself in the left ventricle. Now, this left ventricle, again, is going to contract inwards, and upwards, and it's going to push our blood cell up through this little valve here and out through this vessel, which is the aorta. This aorta is now coming round, and it's now going down to the rest of the body via the aorta and other arteries, by the way. And it's now going to go to the tissue beds. It's going to go to, let's say, the working muscle of the quadricep when a Qatar triathlete is cycling or swimming. And it's going to deliver and drop off its oxygen via that capillary bed. And guess what? It comes back around that loop into the vena cava and back. So one of the things I encourage you to do in your answers when you write about this is say where the blood cell has been from and where it's going to. If you put those into statements, that's going to get you marks. So let's say, for example, it's come from the vena cava here, and it's going to the right atrium here. It was in the right atrium, passes through the valve, and goes to the right ventricle. From to. Try and put those things into your answers. Other things, I just want to sort of recognise that from here to here, this loop here, let me go darker, that loop there is one loop of this system, and we call it the pulmonary loop, the pulmonary circuit. And then we've now got a second loop from here all the way round to here. We've got another loop, and that's called the systemic loop or the systemic circuit. Now, I raise that, first of all, because it's useful for you to know and to understand. But secondly, we have that double loop because we're quite a large animal. We're quite a large object. So you guys know all about exchange ratios and surface to volume ratios in your biology. I'm not going to get into that in PE. But can you recognise if we were a much smaller animal, let's say a mouse, another mammal, we'd only have a single loop that passes all the way through because those ratios are different. Because we're quite large as an object, as a mammal, we need these double loops. So effectively, force is applied to this. Our little blood cell here, there he is, look, let's call him Colin. Colin, the red blood cell. He had force applied to him twice, didn't he? He was through the heart twice, wasn't he? So that double loop helps him on his way. Colin, the red blood cell. I was not expecting that. Colin, the red blood cell. Okay, I've got to change canvas right back to you. Colin, the red blood cell. He was a good guy. He was born in the bone marrow, a function of the skeleton. He just travelled constantly. He was always on the move, and he had no space for anything else. Didn't even have space for a nucleus. Didn't even have human DNA. I miss him. Not really sure what just happened there, But I just thought I'd mention that. Right, okay, just a couple of reminders, features. Our atria are our upper chambers, they receive blood. Okay, so the right atrium receives blood from the vena cava, the left atrium receives it from the pulmonary vein. The ventricles are our lower chambers, they eject blood, they apply force to the blood and push it out of the heart on its happy journey on those two circuits. Remember about our arteries and our veins. So examples of our arteries are aorta and pulmonary artery. There are many others, by the way, brachial, carotid, there's loads and loads of different ones. And what do? They exit, effectively they leave the heart. They're strong and elastic. They deal with high pressure. They deal with oxygenated blood, with the exception of our pulmonary artery, which of course is carrying deoxygenated blood up to the lung. And they depart the heart and take blood to where it's required, either in one circuit or the other. Whereas our veins, of course, they're doing something else. They're bringing blood back. And one of the things I'd like just to notice about the vena cava specifically is it contains valves, and those valves to prevent backflow of blood in there. Now, I also want to mention valves within the heart themselves. Okay, so we've got three types of valves. We've got the bicuspid valve, which is on the left side of the heart, and it's between the left atrium and the left ventricle. We mentioned that earlier, and it prevents blood going back into the left atrium. The tricuspid valve does exactly the same on the right side of the heart. And just notice our semilunar valves, of which we're interested in too, they're the pulmonary and the aortic valve. So as blood leaves those two arteries we just talked about, they prevent blood falling back into the heart when the heart's in its relaxation phase. So we've got our three types of valve that we've got there that we want to have good awareness of. Okay, now I want to spend a bit of time on this. Colin, he's back. Thank God. We've missed you, Colin. We've missed you. Mwah. Oh, I'm worried about Colin. Anyway, let's think about Colin here. What is his job? He's a red blood cell. I've just said he ain't got a nucleus. He's a biconcave disc, for goodness sake. Don't worry about that term in PE. You can use it in biology if you want. Notice he has got millions of hemoglobin all over, Colin. He's a spotty fella, okay? He's covered in hemoglobin, these iron-rich proteins. You guys know they're producing the ribosomes, don't you? But anyway, they're all over this red blood cell. And Colin, as a result of the presence of that hemoglobin, is able to do the following roles. He's able to transport oxygen. Oxygen and hemoglobin like each other. They have what we call a high affinity. They like each other. They want to be together. So Colin can transport oxygen. Where is he transporting that oxygen to? Well, he's transporting it, for example, to the muscle tissue. And that could be for aerobic respiration, aerobic energy release, for example. But he's got another job to do. He's also, that hemoglobin, once oxygen has been dropped off and deposited, he's also capable of transporting carbon dioxide. So on the way back to the heart and then up to the lung, he's going to transport that carbon dioxide, and that's going to ultimately be deposited at the lung, and we'll talk about that in a second, and it's going to be breathed out. So it's really important we realise that oxygen, when it's attached to this red blood cell, it actually becomes what we call oxyhemoglobin. Okay, so it actually combines with that hemoglobin. I won't bother telling about carbamine hemoglobin, which is the carbon dioxide equivalent, but they actually combine, okay, and they sit on that hemoglobin protein and they're transported as a result. So this is literally a vessel. Okay, it is a ship. It is passing through. Think of it like a submarine traveling through that liquidy place. Okay, it's kind of a weird thought, isn't it? And again, just going back to your biology, which again is useful here. You guys know why we have these delivery systems, don't you? You know about surface to volume ratios. You know, because we're a large object with a relatively small surface area, we need these transportation vessels because we can't do it like other smaller life forms. Let's talk about bacteria, for example, right? You know about these things, so you can apply the same principles here. Okay, brilliant. What I do want to spend some time on is alveoli for gas exchange. Okay, so I feel a bit bad about this because I slightly misrepresented it in this particular image, but nevertheless, let's see if we can get some key points here. What have we got? Our blue shape here, this here is an alveolus. Okay, so it's a singular of our alveoli. It's an alveolus. And of course, what we've got sort of running past it is a capillary. And the point I want to make here is a couple of things. We know that through that capillary are squeezing perfectly red blood cells. And they are literally lined up like this. Passing through this space. Now, of course, this makes us realise there are many, many of these alveoli, there are many, many of these capillaries, but they are literally passing through on their way. Okay, it's such a tight space. All like the plasma, the what we call the tissue fluid, has been squeezed out. It's only the red blood cells, though we're not going to get into how that gets back in. Doesn't matter. But these red blood cells are being squeezed through here. Why? The reason we get this, the reason we have this, is that obviously as these red blood cells squeeze through, they are transporting carbon dioxide, okay, amongst other things. So they're transporting carbon dioxide. Whereas in our actual alveolus, there's very little carbon dioxide. There's not much of it in the air, right? It's whatever it is, 0.03% in the air, whatever. So as these blood cells pass through, these carbon dioxide molecules literally diffuse across. Why? Because there is a diffusion gradient. We here have a diffusion gradient. Remember, all diffusion is gases moving about randomly. Okay, that kind of kinetic energy theory. Okay, so we've got a diffusion gradient, and what happens here is that those carbon dioxide, because there's more in the red blood cell, their net movement, their total movement is into the alveolus, and we've sort of depicted the two membranes, the capillary membrane and the alveolar membrane, we've depicted almost them as like broken with little gaps. It's not quite realistic, but we're trying to give you the sense that they can blip or squeeze through here, folks. They can blip and squeeze through. Now, meanwhile, we've got quite a lot of oxygen molecules, or molecular oxygen we could call it, in the alveolus, because we've breathed it in, and as you know, oxygen is about 20% of the air. So what happens here is, because we've only got very little oxygen on the red blood cells, these diffuse across onto the red blood cell, making here oxyhemoglobin, okay? And that then obviously gets transported off and goes back to the heart and goes around to the muscles and all sorts. So a couple of things. We have a diffusion gradient. We have, for example, greater quantities of oxygen in the alveolus compared to the blood, and the opposite the case with carbon dioxide. Therefore, we get this diffusion gradient and the movement of gases between. A couple of things I would like to add to this. First of all, at the alveoli, or the singular alveolus, what we have got is we've got oxygen moving to the blood. And now, can I stress that is what we call net movement? Okay, not everyone does it. There's actually some going the other direction, but the total overall movement is that way. And obviously, we've got our carbon dioxide, and that is moving into the alveolus. Now, just last couple of points, things that are positive about this structure. So it's a short diffusion path. So you see how close the alveolus is to the actual red blood cells. It's really short diffusion path. It's a moist environment, which helps with this. And we have what you guys know in biology as a PPM, a partially permeable membrane. I've touched on that already. So that helps us to understand how this oxygen moves across. And of course, the other thing we've got is a great blood supply. So we've got huge quantities of blood being supplied up to the lung, and therefore we have lots of surface area for this exchange to take place. Therefore, it's quite efficient. It's quite a fast exchange. And there we go. Those are our key principles at this point. Now I'm going to carry on, I'm going to crack straight into this. And section 8 already, goodness me, what time is it? Oh, we are getting on a bit though. Section 8, short-term effects of exercise. You folks already know, this is a really big section if I can position it correctly. It's a big section because it gets lots of marks. So let's just go through and let's look at the impact of each of these during exercise experiences. So let's go here. First of all, muscle and blood temperature increases. So everything gets a bit warmer. Why? Because we're typically doing things like aerobic energy release, which releases energy. Excuse me, and energy is heat, right? So of course we get warmer for that reason. So why is this good? Well, why is this relevant? Well, things like muscles become more pliable. They become more elastic. We even get the release of more synovial fluid in joints, and joints become a little bit more kind of fluid and flexible. Fantastic. Our heart rate increases. Brilliant. We get greater delivery of oxygen. Brilliant. We can do more work aerobically at the muscle tissue. Our stroke volume increases. The same thing. Our stroke volume, obviously, the amount of blood leaving the heart per contraction. Those things, obviously, we can multiply those things together, and our cardiac output goes up. Guess what? Greater oxygen delivery, more removal of waste such as carbon dioxide. We redistribute blood. Remind yourself, this is through what we call vasodilation or vasoconstriction of our arteries? Well, I'll tell you that it's really of our arterioles, but nevertheless, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. So let's think about this. A blood vessel leading to the muscle will dilate and become more open. A blood vessel leading to, the liver will constrict and become smaller. It effectively, what it will do is it will vasoconstrict and it will resist blood flow. Okay, so those things are important. Now we'll come back to these two yellow ones in a second. We get increased blood flow to the working muscles. We already mentioned that. And if we're doing anaerobic work, we get lactic acid production. Now remember, lactic acid is a fatiguing product of anaerobic respiration. But remember also that lactate, which is part of lactic acid, is actually quite useful, okay? So we can reuse that. But of course, the temporary state is that it's fatiguing, makes our legs heavy, makes it burn, makes it hard to carry on. Now, if we are doing sub-maximal exercise compared to maximal exercise, I just want to sort of make a distinction here. Let's do sub-maximal. This is, for example, Kate in the triathlon. We get an increasing breathing rate, tidal volume, and minute ventilation. It's an interesting one, that, because they want me to tell you that we really get an increase in breathing depth. Okay, next time you exercise, notice that breathing depth increases quite quickly. Breathing rate is like the last thing, but that's happening. But if we go to maximal exercise, let's go to Josh, our sprinter we talked about before. After that race finishes, he might not breathe during it actually, he gets a great increase in those factors. So be prepared to say that if it's a sort of a sub-maximal kind of thing, you get an increase in. If it's a maximal, anaerobic, high intensity, you get a greater increase. That's a great tip for you, greater increase. So try to look out for that in your questions. If it's more of a maximal nature, a great increase. If it's more of a sub-maximal nature, our triathlon, for example, an increase in. Now then, we're going to move this on. We also have our long-term effects of exercise. Now, first things first, I'll try and get them on the screen for you. First things first, folks, can you notice they've been separated into categories? 3, 4, 5. Now, this is really just me doing this, but I'm hoping it's going to help you. So let's look at musculoskeletal long-term effects. Now, remember, this is really what we're talking about after weeks, months, and years of training. So in essence, how does our body adapt to our training regime? So musculoskeletal, our bones get denser. Fantastic, folks. Try and get this on your notes as well. Why is that important? A bone, doesn't that make us heavier and slower, James? No, it means the skeleton. Remember, one of its functions was to provide movement. It can resist greater forces from the muscles and move still. Brilliant. We get hypertrophy, engorging, fattening of muscle tissue. Really important, that. And you might want to think, well, why is that happening? Well, that's happening because it's storing more stuff. We've also got an increase in strength. So the muscle literally can apply more force via the tendon to the more dense bone. Brilliant. Increased muscular endurance. So it depends, obviously, what we're doing and we're training here. But if we're doing sort of more reps, more sets, lower weights, for example, we're going to get more muscular endurance than strength. We're going to become more fatigue resistant. That's great, right? We're going to tie less. We're going to accumulate lactic acid at a higher intensity of exercise. In other words, we can work at higher intensities aerobically because those muscles don't fatigue as early. Now, metabolic. Remember, metabolism is any chemical process. So what do we get as a result? We get a delayed oblet. Oblet is the onset of blood lactate accumulation. In other words, it's that moment where it's like, oh my God, my legs are hurting. We delay oblet, and we delay it not in time, but to a higher intensity of exercise. We get a higher aerobic capacity, sometimes call it VO2 max, and we are faster at recovery. Remember, our aerobic system is our recovery system. What about respiratory changes? Well, even though it's not quite respiratory, we get more capillaries around those alveoli. We get an increased minute volume, so we can literally move more gas in and out of our lungs per minute. We get a greater tidal volume. Remember, this is breathing depth, so we're able to breathe more deeply. And our respiratory muscles, our diaphragm, our intercostals, they become stronger and they go so can push air out of the body, out of the lungs more efficiently. Fantastic. Actually has some other knock-on effects I'm not going to get into here. And cardiovascular, remember cardiovascular, heart, the blood vessels and the blood. Again, we get capillarization, so more capillaries, more diffusion sites. We get a greater maximum cardiac output. So remember, cardiac output, amount of blood leaving the heart per minute. Maximal level is higher. And that is because our stroke volume goes up. That is because At rest, our heart rate can decrease. So at rest, if our stroke volume is higher, our heart rate can be lower at rest, which actually, imagine if let's say that you've got a maximum heart rate of 200 BPM. Let's say that your resting heart rate goes from 80 and it goes down to 60. Well, now in exercise, you've got between 60 to 200 beats available to you. That's a range of 140 compared to before when it was 120. That means you've actually got a greater capacity to deliver blood around the system because your resting heart rate is lower, and that's happened because the stroke volume's gone up. And we also get the heart fattening and engorging becomes stronger, particularly that muscular strength of the heart, particularly on that left-hand side. That left ventricle. Now, our general ones. We manage our weight, brilliant. We tend not to die, brilliant. And we're less likely to be ill. It's pretty good exercise, isn't it? You got to give. I tell you what, you got to give some creds to exercise. It does good stuff. Okay, I'm going to pause just for a moment. So, folks, we know our components of fitness and our fitness tests are big topics for us. And I just want to sort of almost bring the skill to your attention at this point. I want you to realise, for example, that when we talk about CV endurance, yes, you need to be able to define this, but one of the core skills in order to be able to give impactful examples. So I just want to dwell on this. Of course, we're talking about continuously exercising without tiring. But can I just stress our triathlete, literally Kate here, what we're talking about. Kate is able to swim, cycle and run continuously without fatigue and work at higher intensities aerobically and prevent oblock. And you see how that is impact on Kate's performance. She's able to run at higher intensity or move at higher intensities aerobically, and that helps to delay oblock. If she doesn't accumulate lactic acid, she can keep working without fatigue. That is an impact-based statement, okay? And I really, really want you to consider achieving that when you give your example. It's not just a matter of saying CV, like what happens in marathon running, right? We need to say what the impact is. Now, the other skill is to consider which tests are valid, reliable, and practical tests for the testing of that. And what we have here is we have the protocols for each of those tests. Now, obviously, for CV endurance, we've got two tests here, Cooper 12-minute run walk, and we've got the multi-stage fitness test. The point I want to get across to you, you've got it on the page, so you're going to learn it, obviously, but can you see that that is a clear and distinct process of how we go about doing that multi-stage fitness test, okay? Notice as well that we have got what the result is. It's the last level and shuttle reach. Notice we're being specific. The test ends after 2 missed beeps. Notice we're given the exact measurement of the track. These are the details that I really want you to be considering getting into your answers. Notice for our Cooper 12-minute run walk, notice we calculate the meters travelled. That's our output. Notice that we're saying the result is how far. Notice that participants have to keep moving, etc. Now, just one little detail on the Cooper 12-minute run. We must have a specific course. And what I mean by that is it's not enough to estimate that around your football pitch is 272 metres. You've got to measure it as 272 metres. The other thing we do with Cooper 12-minute run is we put cones every 50 metres. Okay, these are little markers so that we can sort of be accumulating, and as time runs down, it allows sort of the monitoring. So there we go. Let's move on. Let's have a little look at muscular endurance. And I know students sometimes get cardiovascular endurance and muscular endurance mixed up, but muscular endurance, we can consider it to be almost like anaerobic, really. It's the ability of the muscles to repeatedly contract without rest. Okay, so it's an ongoing contraction. And the example I always think about is an Olympic rower who's pulling on that oar for whatever it is, 11 minutes straight against that resistance. Oh dear, that must be hard. I've never really rowed, if I'm honest, apart from a bit of recreational stuff. So what's happening here? Olympic rower repeatedly contracts the biceps to flex the elbows and pull against the water without fatigue, meaning, here's the impact, they maintain their pace in the crucial last 100 meters. Folks, that last bit about the impact, I'm putting our definition into our example here, but that last bit about impact, I cannot stress enough that I believe that you should be doing that. Teachers as well, that is something we really should be guiding our students by. Now, obviously, we've got a press-up sit-up test. It's a 1-minute test. We must use the correct technique, and we count the number of either press-ups or sit-ups we do in that context. Let's keep going. Speed. Definitions there. Moving the body quickly. Distance divided by time. Fine. Example, we've got a table tennis player, or this could be Tom, our tennis player, equivalent example. Table tennis player moves rapidly to their left to reach a hard hit loop shot, before the ball passes their paddle and wins the point for the opponent. So it is actually impact, so they're preventing the loss of the point through their action, through their use of speed. How do we test it? We test it through our 30-metre sprint. What have we got? We've got a 60 to 80-metre area. Why is that? We measure the 30-metre distance within that, and then the other distance is for the rolling start. So your course this is going to be your start line here, but our runners are going to start here and they're going to accelerate here, and it's that bit which is time once they're up and running and fast. Okay, so we've got that, and it's obviously the time tends to be between sort of 3 and 5.5 seconds on average typically. Now then, strength, couple of more details here. First of all, it's the ability of a muscle to exert force for a short period of time. Here's our example. Our weightlifter here, we don't need to use weightlifter, it could be anything, right? Weightlifter begins to raise a world record weight off the ground by applying maximal muscular force to the bar with the upper and lower body. Okay, so the impact is there off the ground. It's coming off the ground because they're applying that force for a short period of time. Brilliant. How do we measure this? Well, we've got our grip strength dynamometer test, everyone's favourite word. What a word. By the way, there are other dynamometer tests. There's one for the lower back, there's ones for the hamstrings, all kinds of different ones. We tend to use the ones for the forearms because it's accessible. He stores well in a cupboard. Every P department's got them. Anyway, what do? We hold it in our dominant hand, lefties on the left, righties on the right. We start with by the way, it's different versions of this step, so this is the one I'm giving you. You start with your hand up above your head, so it is our little stick man. He's literally got his, what was that? He's literally got his arm up above his head with his kind of a dynamometer here. Okay, so he's got it up there like that. And what he's going to do, he's going to start squeezing that handle and then gradually bring it down into this position here, okay? We do this 3 times and we record the best or the highest score, not the average, okay? We record the best score in that. Now, our 1 repetition max is probably our most detailed test, okay? So run through that, but the whole principle here are the following things. We, of course, lift a weight, okay, that we think might be in the region of our maximum. We use the correct technique. We lift it once, and then we must rest for 5 minutes, and then we repeat with heavy weights. What we really need to stress here is that the last weight you lifted successfully is your outcome, okay? So try and get that into your answers. Okay, last one before I change canvas. Power. Strength times speed, combination, a product of strength times speed, applying large forces at high contractile speeds. Okay, we've got all kinds of examples, javelin throwing, sprinting, Josh from our examples. 100-meter sprinter applies maximal force to the block at the highest speed possible to accelerate them ahead of their opponent in the race, and especially at the start of the race, right? So we're giving an impact of having this. Now, we've got 2 ways of doing this. We've got standing jump test and we've got a vertical jump test. So standing jump test is effectively a 2-footed jump, 2-footed landing. We jump from this point, we jump as far as we can from this point, and then of course we measure the distance between those 2 points. Now our vertical jump test is the difference, that sort of chalky one, probably, unless you've got other equipment. And we reach up and make a mark, or we slide a ruler up, it's our standing reach height. We jump up and touch the board or jump and mark chalk on the wall, and then we measure the distance between those 2 points. And of course, what that gives us is here's our standing reach height, here's our jumping reach height. What is that distance? And that distance is our power reading in centimeters. Okay, so that's what that gives us. Okay, I need to change the canvas, come back with a couple of other fitness tests, and then we'll finish off with some, risk and injury stuff. Folks, we are in the home straight. Flexibility in the sit and reach test, folks. First of all, define flexibility. What is it? It's a range of motion around a joint. So, for example, our wheelchair basketball player Carlos needs to have a wide range of motion at his shoulder joint in order to be able to reach backwards and catch overthrown passes, for example. Good example here. But we've got another one. A hockey goalkeeper shows a wide range of movement in the shoulder by hyperextending to save a slow-moving ball that has already looped over their head and is going into the net. So they make the save, prevent the goal. So how do we do this sit and reach? We remove shoes. We have legs straight, knees locked. We have soles of the feet on the box. We reach forward with one hand on top of the other. We stretch as far as possible. Guys, we must hold this stretch. And we do no bouncing, jerking, and we take our distance in centimeters, okay? I'm sure you've done this, but those key points, get them into your answers. Let's move us on. Agility, everyone loves an Illinois agility test, don't they? How quickly you can change direction under control without losing speed, balance, or power. Here's our example. Julie, our netball player, dodging left and right to find space to receive the ball. She finds space, she receives the ball, which then she might pass into the D for a shot and a goal, right? This is important. Illinois agility test. What do? We mark out the course exactly. We start lying face down. We call that the prone position. Once the start goes, we run the course as quickly as we can, and however fast is recorded, and we measure that in seconds. It's usually something in the region of 15 to 20. 15 is quick, but 20 seconds is not unusual for that Illinois agility test. I'm sure you've had a go at it. So there we go. Let's finish off strong balance. Okay, often not considered a component of fitness, absolutely is. Okay, and a critical one. I do a couple of exercise classes a week which are based around balance and coordination, rather than sort of power and force and strength and aerobic capacity and this sort of stuff. And it's actually quite. I'm 46, so it's kind of nice to do that sort of work. It's more like I enjoy stressing those things, not just kind of working, as it were. It's quite nice to do that, and it's tough as well. Anyway, definition: center of mass above the base. Examples: our skier is leaning forward to keep their center of mass above their skis in order to prevent a crash and stay in the race, and perhaps register a good time where they get on a podium or something like that. Now then, how do we do this? Our hands are on our hips. The foot is on the inside of the knee of the opposite leg. They raise their heel, folks. We must stand on the toes, on the ball of the foot. We hold it for as long as possible. Crucial. If either the heel of the standing foot leaves the floor or touches the floor, or the foot leaves the knee, the balance is lost and the timer stops, and we measure it in seconds. Okay, almost there. Coordination. The ability to repeat a pattern or sequence with fluency and accuracy. Lovely definition. The high jumper arches their back while simultaneously kicking their legs up in order to clear the bar with their lower body. So it's a pattern, it's a sequence, it's a numerous subroutines of a technique put together. Okay, that's what we mean by coordination. And we tend to test it with a wall throw test, or we sometimes call it an Anderson test. 2 meters. Here's our little person. I'll see if I can. Here's our little person. They're kind of. Don't know what I'm doing here. They're standing here. They're 2 meters from a wall. There's the wall. And of course, what are they doing here? 2 meters distance. What am I drawing? They stand behind that line and they do an underarm throw with one hand and catch it with the other hand and then repeat. They do as many catches as they can in 30 seconds, and we count the total number in that period of time. Okay, there we go. Big topic, that components of fitness. I know you might find it a bit tedious running through that with me and those fitness tests, but I mean, really now, that's going to be a real potential area of marks for you, so it's critical we do. Okay, we're finishing off. Injury prevention, potential hazards. What's not to love about this? So we're going to be looking at minimizing the risk of injury. Look for that term in your questions. If you get that, this is what it's going to be asking of you. How do we do that? How do we mitigate? Okay, mitigate, by the way, is a nice word. Wasn't expecting to say that just now. It means you sort of reduce the risk, in essence. So how do we do that? Well, we wear PPE, a term that will never be the same again since COVID, but it's personal protective equipment. Think about your gum shield. Think about your shin pads. Think about your shoulder pads, your head protector, a helmet when you're BMX riding, and so on and so on. Personal elbow pads, knee pads for a volleyball player. We wear the correct clothing. Think about Astro trainers for hockey players. What about light clothing for people who are maybe doing marathons, like wicking clothing? Wicking means it removes the moisture from your skin and helps to evaporate that moisture and cool you. That's really important, that clothing. It can help us minimize the risk of injury. In this case, it might be overheating, right? Or slipping on the Astro. Appropriate level of competition. So we've got sort of age groups in competition, which is kind of a blunt method. We've also got sex. Obviously, often in many sports, we have males playing males and females playing females. So that appropriate level of competition comes that way. Lifting and carrying equipment safely. This can be during performance, such as lifting in a line out in rugby, but it can also be before and after, putting the goals away. Literally I've had to carry rugby goals on my shoulders at times. You've got to do this kind of safely and competently. And then to finish off with, folks, obviously warming up and cooling down really helps to reduce the risk of injury. Okay, and we do warm and cool down in other sections. I'm not covering them today, but of course we could look at that in more detail. So really important that we can apply examples. And to finish off with this, folks, I want you to start to be thinking about potential hazards. Now, I don't think I can make this any more interesting. What I've done is I've literally rendered these out of previous mark schemes for you. So if you're asked for potential hazards in a fitness centre, in a swimming pool, in a sports hall, this language is really going to help you. So I'm just going to pick out a couple of examples. What do you need? Ultimately, you need to get your head into it and learn it, don't you? Let's be honest. Let's take the fitness centre. I always consider this to be like a gym, like a weights kind of thing. So litter and bags might be left out. It might be overcrowded. There might not be supervisors. The correct technique or lack of induction session. People, you know what, like especially lads, you know, like trying to be all beefy in the gym and, I can lift the heavy weights. If you're in a class right now, there's probably someone who does that in there, right? If the floor's not clean or slippy, if the exercise mats are knackered, if the machines are too close together, you might end up doing a leg extension and booting someone up the butt. Participants overtraining, real issue in sort of gyms. Like people get carried away, right? I'm not one of them. Machines misused or more than one person on a machine, inappropriate use. So these are potential hazards. And of course, if you're a gym owner, if you're working as a fitness instructor or a personal trainer, you're trying to mitigate or prevent this stuff from happening, right? You know, would you mind putting your bag away? Oh, can I please clean that because we've got spillage? You know, this is like literally what's going on here. I won't go over every single one, get into it and make sure. Now, I do want to stress what we've got here. I have got asterisks. And the reason these is that these have not previously appeared on past paper questions. So what I'm saying, especially to teachers, is be prepared to add to these lists when these do it. These are James's ones. So playing fields, let me go over. If the surface is uneven or slippery or has debris, so poor surface. If there's a lack of floodlights or poor lighting, we've all been there, haven't we? If there's a long distance from emergency support and availability of first aid. If there's the wrong footwear, specifically for winter sports, you know, no football boots, for example. If the pitch is frozen or waterlogged. If there's poor weather and extreme cases threat of a lightning strike. I was in fact twice on a sports field. I've been way too close to a lightning strike. It is terrifying. And, you know, when everyone goes in when it's like that, there's actually a good reason for it. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that road. What about an artificial outdoor surface? So we're talking about a 4G and Astro here. Incorrect footwear is probably the biggest example. Graze and burns, you must have had that, right? Where supposedly, I've played rugby on Astro, so I'm sure many of you have as well. And I've had still get a couple of burns that way. Debris on the surface again. Surface has been underwater, undersanded. That's actually important treatment for those surfaces. If there's a lack of runoff area before the fence, I reckon some of you will be familiar with this. Incorrect lifting and carrying technique for goal potion and moving, because often you're sharing that space with others and you've got to move things on and off. An external hire might mean that equipment becomes damaged. So this gets used by a lot of different people. As a result of that, damage can occur. So folks, I think we are there. Hopefully that's useful for you. I think it's fair to say that you need to recover what we've gone over there. There's a lot of detail, a lot of words, a lot of memorization. Do it. Do it. And it will serve you well. Really appreciate your attention, folks. Thanks.
And folks, we are there. Fantastic. I think my sound's going in nicely. Marta, there we go. What do you think of that?
Yeah, good. Excellent.
Good. Any comments or questions or thoughts or anything really?
Yes, well, first of all, I'd like to give a little shout out to Ernest Bevan Academy. They've sent an amazing, lovely picture of their Year 11 boys attending their live revision. So really well done. Massive thumbs up to Ernest Bevan Academy.
I think I've been to Ernest Bevan.
I'm sure you have.
I think I've been there. I'm trying to think this through. I'm sure I used to be a moderator for Ernest. I think it used to be called Ernest Bevan College. I might have that wrong. Forgive me if I'm getting it wrong. I don't mean any offence. But I think I've been there. Anyway, hello, Ernest Bevan folk. Thank you very much for taking part. We really appreciate it. Anything else?
I just wanted to basically make a comment and check something with you, James. I noticed that throughout the session you talked a lot about skills. Why is that?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, I think we're all, as students, as teachers, I think sometimes we focus so much on content that we forget that there's a mechanism by which we go about it. So what we did there in terms of numerous aspects of that where we talk about justifying or evaluating or whatever. It's really important that we address those points, because my personal view is that PE teaching, therefore PE learning in these contexts is about developing a skill through certain pieces of content. So that's the way I see it, and I mean, take a look at the infographics that we published. They're there on the hub page. I mean, they will give you a really, really good insight into which skills you're going to be required to do. The identifying that, describing, that, explaining, and the different proportions of that. And that's something we should be prepping, and that's what I'm trying to do, I suppose. And with that in mind, folks, one of the things I would say as well is, especially if you're on the hub page, just next to you over there is all the stuff for paper 2, right? So you might even want to start getting that ready and having that ready for when we do session 2 for paper 2 after paper 1 exam's done. We're not anticipating many people. Well, OCR is a funny one, right? Because technically you do have to prepare paper 2 material for paper 1 because of the 6 mark question that covers both papers. But it's, that's something you've got to obviously consider. But maybe start to be having a little glimpse of that paper 2 stuff as well. There's a lot of material, a lot of resources there. I think it would be worthwhile doing so. So yeah, I think that would be positive.
Okay, fantastic. And I've got a question from a student. I just want to make sure that my voice is heard properly. The question is, can you explain how the intercostal muscles and diaphragm work during inhaling and exhaling, please?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to tell you at rest. So the diaphragm, first of all, when the diaphragm is relaxed, is in this kind of shape, okay? And it sort of sits up and pushes as the base of our sort of chest cavity. And when it contracts, it goes like that and sort of forces the ribs out. And that's when we breathe in. So a really sort of important point to make here, just sort of anecdotally, is think of your chest as almost like bellows. That's what's happening under you. I don't know if you ever use bellows. I suppose it's not that common anymore. But it's just like a bellow. So it's opening up like that. Now, simultaneously, the intercostal muscles, they literally, if I had 2 ribs the ribs like that, they literally are muscles in between those ribs, and they pull up. So when we're breathing in inhalation, as the diaphragm does that, those intercostal muscles pull up. So, of course, the air inside the chest cavity gets bigger, the lungs expand, and I just did it. Just sucks it. They make more space. And because then there's a pressure gradient, we don't need to get into the physics of this too much, but because there's a pressure gradient from the external outside environment to the internal environment of the lungs, then air rushes in. Now, at rest, when we breathe out, when we exhale, all that happens is that diaphragm goes, relaxes back to its shape, and the intercostals go relax back into their relaxed state. So, of course, the lungs get compressed back in, and it breathes out, and that's it. Now, the thing to consider about when we exercise is the diaphragm will contract with more force, the intercostals will contract with more force, and other muscles start to contribute as well. And that's how that happens. And I'm going to throw a little philosophical question for you, which is, I've just realised the cat's on the outside roof of our house.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, just a philosophical thought for you here. Are the inside of your lungs, like the bronchi, the bronchioles, the alveoli, are they the inside or the outside of a body? And I'm going to sort of let you think about it for a few seconds. And I'm going to say to you that technically speaking, the inner lining, the inside of your alveoli, is the external surface of your body. We don't think about that too much, That's actually an interesting philosophical question. And if you think about human beings, we sort of think of ourselves almost like a cylinder shape with arms and legs attached and a head on top, right? We're not. We're shaped like a donut. We've got lots of breathing network, all of that transportation network for food. That's all the external part of our body. Food passes through, and yes, we absorb it into the bloodstream in the small intestine, all those amino acids and glucose and glycerol and fatty acids. You guys do this in biology, of course, but it's still the outside until it gets into the bloodstream. So I just thought I'd leave that as a philosophical point. I don't think it helps us with OCRGC, but it's just of intrigue, really, and I like talking about this stuff, so what the hell. Any questions, any thoughts, any observations, Marta?
No, I'm very happy with your answers. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, I just want to re-stress, we do actually have to go because we've got WJC session in literally 15 minutes, so we're going to have to get out, make a cup of tea, and get on with that. Okay. We really appreciate you being here. Paper 2 is coming up. Can I wish you all the best for paper 1 and your other exams? I know people are doing art exams at the moment. They're doing language speaking exams, all this stuff. Buena suerte, bon chance. Can't remember the German. What is it? Glückwunsch? No, no, that's Merry Christmas.
Good. I can't remember.
Yeah. Anyway, there's good Spaß. No, I haven't made it up. But anyway, good luck for all of those things. And we're here for paper 2 when you're ready, and we'll come back after your exam. Mock exam, use it. Model answers, please learn them, folks. and mark schemes are there as well of this session. There's the camera there. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, okay? Take it easy. I mean, work hard is what I mean.